Imagine yourself as a kid and remember those times that you were sad or you cried or you were just anxious. And now imagine if you were told that it was okay to feel those things, that there was no shame at all in crying or just being sad, and instead thought that it was just a clue to a bigger issue, that that emotion was not the problem, that it was trying to tell you that there is another problem that you need to figure out. How different would your life have been growing up if you just were taught that it was okay to have emotion? Think about that for a second. Let's go through exactly what happens when you ignore a huge part of how your brain actually works, and why the things that we've been taught about logic versus emotion are not just wrong, they're really harmful. It's interesting how often entire societies agree on something that is just so fundamentally wrong, and then how long these beliefs remain as the truth. Just like the belief that suppressing negative emotions equals strength, despite the mounting evidence against it, negative emotions actually evolved as vital signs that something needs your attention. Like anger highlights violations of your boundaries, fear identifies potential threats, sadness indicates meaningful loss. When you look at it from this perspective, it's clear that what emotions are clues. Dr. James Gross at Stanford University has done extensive research on what actually happens in your brain and body when you suppress emotions. In his studies, when people try to suppress their emotional expression, their stress levels actually increased. Their sympathetic nervous system, that's your fight or flight response, became much more active, not less. So while they look calm on the outside, their bodies were working overtime internally. The effects aren't just temporary either. Gross followed people over time and found those who habitually suppress emotions experience high levels of negative emotions, lower positive emotions, worse social relationships, and decreased overall well-being. Think about that for a second. The strategy people use to feel better actually makes them feel worse long term. Your brain needs both the logical analysis and the emotional signals. When you cut off the emotional half, you're not actually making yourself more rational. You're ironically sabotaging your brain's natural decision-making system. There was this really interesting study done by Dr. Brene Brown where they found that when people witness someone else showing vulnerability, 90% of the time, people viewed it as courageous. But when asked about showing vulnerability themselves, most people described it as a weakness. Very weird discrepancy going on here. If you're genuinely thinking about what I just said, why is it a strength if someone else does it, but a weakness when you do it? What does this show us? It shows us that our internal fear does not match external reality. We are making decisions based on what we think will happen, like that we will be judged or rejected. However, what often happens is that people respect or admire you for it. So, what does a life look like when you're terrified of being real with people? First off, you're not actually being you. You're not you anymore. You're hiding a huge part of your identity. And when people can't be true to their identity and they're living this disingenuous life, there's always a cost. A cost to your happiness, and a cost to your intimacy. Because how can you create real relationships when you're not being yourself? There's no vulnerability, so there's no intimacy. Because people don't actually know who you are. You're basically alone in this world, surrounded by people who love a fake version of you. True vulnerability is sharing your authentic thoughts, feelings, and struggles. And that does require tremendous courage. However, it's the foundation of genuine connection, trust, and intimacy. People who hide their true selves don't avoid a weakness. They just prevent strength from developing. So if you're someone who is scared of vulnerability, are you okay with the cost of the lack of vulnerability? And are you okay with not having true connections? Is it worth losing out on all of that in order to hide those weak parts of yourself? Throughout my whole life, I remember always hearing that logic is better than emotion, that logic is the opposite of emotion, and that you should use logic for decision making. Well, let me tell you guys something. Logic and emotions are not the opposite, and logic isn't the only thing required to make good decisions. Neuroscientists studied patients with damage to their brain's emotional centers, specifically their amygdala. What they found was that people with this damage could understand decision-making rules intellectually, but they consistently made terrible choices. In real life, they struggled with keeping relationships, keeping jobs, making everyday decisions, not because they weren't smart enough, but because they lost their emotional signals. Think about it like this. Emotions are one of your essential tools for making decisions. If you have a set of tools and emotions are missing, you're missing a vital tool. So when you try to shut off your emotions and be purely logical, all you're really doing is removing an essential tool. Now you only have one tool instead of two. How could that possibly be better for you? It's not. Logic and emotion are both tools that should be used simultaneously. The way that it works is our brains create what researchers call somatic markers. Basically, your body remembers what felt good and what felt bad from past experiences. So if you did something and it hurt you, your brain remembers this as something that feels bad, and your emotions signal the same answer. It's like when you hit your foot on something, you know not to do that again because it hurt and made you feel bad. Same thing socially. If you said something to somebody that they perceived as negative, you know not to say that in the future because of the repercussions. They may have made you feel ashamed or embarrassed. Not good feelings. Without these emotional signals, people become paralyzed by endless analysis or make consistently poor choices despite understanding the logical consequences. So let's stop trying to separate thinking from feeling. Pure logic without emotional input leads to decision paralysis or misguided choices. Our goal shouldn't be to make emotion-free decisions. That's just not possible. It should be to make decisions where we are aware of how our emotions are guiding us. I think if I asked you guys right now what you thought about gender and emotions, you'd probably assume that men logical, women emotional. Even if you don't believe that, that's probably the first thing that would come into your head because of what we've been taught for so long. But is this true? Scientists had a group of men and women get their brains scanned while showing them emotional images. They found that both men and women had almost identical emotional reactions. Both felt negative emotions with similar intensity, and both were equally good at managing those feelings. The only real difference was the specific mental pathways they used to calm down, kind of like taking a different route to the same destination. So if humans react the same way to emotions, why do we treat men as if they're more logical and women as if they're more emotional and dramatic? Quite literally, all that does is create a situation where men struggle with regulating their emotions because they suppress them constantly, and with emotional suppression, there's a lack of emotional regulation. Your emotions tend to build up over time with no release, so eventually you're gonna explode and it's not gonna be pretty. It teaches terrible emotional regulation, and that emotions are bad. So once again, there's one less tool they're taking advantage of. With women, society shows them that they can't be truly honest and expressive with how they feel, like there's something wrong with being emotional or having emotions. But genuine question for you guys. Is there a reason someone should feel guilty for having emotions or showing them? And if there is, what is it? Emotions aren't gendered. It's not important if somebody feels more emotional than somebody else or who feels more emotions. That's not the point. There's quite literally nothing wrong with emotions. But do you know what actually is wrong with this whole situation? In society, we're told to hide our emotions or told that emotions are bad. And most people don't question why they're told that, and if it's actually legit, and what it means. And where does that lead us? To the path of ignorance and the same damn problems over and over again. Just as long as you're expressing your emotions in a healthy way and not harming yourself or anyone else in the process, there's nothing wrong with you. I think the key takeaway from all of this is that emotions aren't what makes us irrational. It's how we react to things and how we choose to regulate them. So stop treating your emotions like they're the enemy when they're one of your best navigational systems. Hey, and if you found this helpful, you're gonna want to watch my next video on the 4 communication mistakes that destroy emotional connection, where I discuss the common communication mistakes that hurt people's ability to understand each other and build strong emotional connections. I've linked it right here in the description below. Let me know in the comments if there was anything particularly surprising to you and if there's anything else that we should know about this topic. And just remember, if you think better, you live better.